Good morning and afternoon, everybody. I'd like you to welcome to today's webinar about social media screening. My name is Max Smith. I'm with 501c Services. 501, for those of you who may not know, provides full service unemployment outsourcing programs and other HR-related programs to more than 3,000 nonprofits nationwide. Two of our most popular programs are the 501c Agencies Trust, which provides unemployment outsourcing for reimbursing employers, and also 501c HR Services, which is a confidential consultation service that helps walk nonprofit employers through tough personnel decisions. A lot of you with us today are already working with us, so thank you very much. Real quick, before I introduce Ben, I'm going to go over our housekeeping. Obviously, there are certification credits for today's webinar through HRCI and through SHRM. You all know how that works. Following the webinar, give us about 24 hours. We will shoot you those codes, and you can use those to get your certification credits. The slide deck has already been PDF'd and is attached to the webinar currently, but you will also get a copy of the slide deck following the program along with a video copy of it. So we email those to you as well. And if you have any questions, Ben's going to address questions at the end. So please submit your questions as they come up throughout. And then he has developed some time at the end to go ahead and cover any questions you all might have. It's a very good topic. I know we all do this, and I think we all know that sometimes we shouldn't be doing it. So Ben's going to be very polite in his reprimand of our activities. But we're joined by our friend Ben. Ben Manis is the founder and CEO of FAMA. It's a candidate screening solution that makes hiring a little bit easier for us. He founded FAMA in 2015, and you're going to have to tell us, Ben, after missing a critical risk of a new hire,
True.
decided to start a new business surrounding that mistake. So hopefully we'll hear about that a little bit. He's well spoken. You can find him on CNBC, Fast Company, the LA Times, TechCrunch, Wall Street Journal. He's all over. He's everywhere. But now he's here with us. So Ben, it's your show.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you very much, Mac, and thanks a lot, everyone, for joining today's webinar. First order of business, as we were talking in the pre-show lobby here. Let's go, Dodgers. We're up 3-0. We're going to bring it home. Big shout out to all my Dodgers fans out there, and big apologies if you're a Yankees fan. But we're not going to talk baseball today. We are going to talk online and social media screening. So as Mac mentioned, I'm the founder, CEO of a company called FAMA. We're lucky to partner with thousands of companies around the world who have expanded the way that they approach candidate screening to include who we are in text, image, and video online. So that's really what we're going to cover today. And I'll show you a quick agenda here briefly. So we'll do a quick, kind of about us. Who are we? Who am I? Question I often ask myself. What is online screening? Why do we do it? Best practices, and rounding out here with some Q&A. So my goal for you today is to, if you haven't already, learn and understand what online social media screening is, why companies are doing it, how it is a reflection of how times are changing, the makeup of the workforce, et cetera. So we're going to provide some context around the why. Why is this a category of screening that's growing, exponentially year over year? We'll talk a little bit about the kind of why and what for around it as well. We'll get into some best practices too. So if you can get the foundation built, then we'll talk a little bit, about, how to run an effective program, whether you do it internally, externally, how to use the information, how to think about compliance, what we flag for, what we screen for, and we'll even walk through a sample report of the product as well. So you can actually see what hits look like. This is not a score, not a thumbs up or a thumbs down. It's not a yes or a no. So we'll show you sample data so you can get a sense of how you might be interacting with this sort of insight about candidates, or two, what you are missing today if you aren't already doing this type of screening. So should be fun. Please submit your questions on the Zoom Q&A. I promise I'll get to every single one of them. Every time we do a presentation like this, it's rife with questions. So Nothing that's silly, no stupid questions. We want everything and anything under the sun to be discussed today. So, happy to answer any questions that come our way. But again, this is the agenda. We'll start big, get a little bit smaller, leave with best practices, and hopefully a clear-eyed perspective on should you decide to go begin your social media screening journey, you'll have best practices on how to do all that. So who are we? There's a bunch of text on the screen. There's some cool logos about our company, but at the end of the day, what we're trying to answer is a pretty big question. How is somebody going to act around fellow employees, around customers when they join a business? We think that a person's online identity, who you are in text, image, and video is a good way to get at the answer to that particular question, right? And think of this as, some folks call it, behavior intelligence, for example, but think of this as a way to get a read into how somebody might act towards other people, whether they act hateful, violent, threatening. Perhaps there's a sort of mindset that person is normalized, maybe treating other people differently because of what they look like, that you're always checking through the interview process. What's the mindset, the mentality this person's going to bring into my organization, into my agency, into my nonprofit? How are they going to act in front of donors? How are they going to act in front of our constituents? How are they going to act with the fellow employees that work with them, right? Especially if you're talking about relationships with kids and children. There are a lot of big questions that we all have to answer when it comes to the behavior of the people that we're hiring and bringing in. And we think today where, as we'll see, more and more of the workforce has become digital natives. This is a, verifiable and validated approach towards, finding the best people, hiring, because you can really get a sense of someone's behavior by looking at that online dimension. As Mac mentioned, I didn't start this company because I was in HR. I was like an investor or talent acquisition. Candidly, before I even started Fama, I thought background checks were stored in some secret underground database buried beneath, 25 miles beneath the Pentagon with some Minority Report style computer that you could like move things around. Obviously, anyone who knows that's not how it works at all. But I was a real neophyte coming into this. So I started Fama because at a previous startup, I hired a guy, looked great on paper, resume referenced really well. But unfortunately, 6 months into the job, the guy ended up sexually harassing one of our top salespeople. Horrible experience for this woman, for the company. After the fact, we saw on this guy's social media all this pejorative, misogynistic content about women that had we seen it, we never would have hired him, never would have brought him on board, right? And so I understood this problem set as early as, 2011, before social media really became what it is today. And so I had sort of a unique insight early on something that affected me that allowed us to kind of get through those early stages of company formation and all of those doubts you have when you run into, starting your own company. And I'm sure many folks here who've run their own nonprofits, companies in the past know what I'm talking about. But, who do we work with? Who do we serve? So, this is I would say, global solution. We work with consumer reporting agencies who resell our solutions that, range from big background screening firms to small background screening firms, but also a wide range of, different channel partners and clients that use us. I think the really interesting piece here from this graphic, the big takeaway, is that when it comes to behavior, it's universal. No matter if you're in Mozambique, Australia, South America, New York City, Los Angeles, Des Moines, Iowa, wherever you're at, what people care about is how's this person going to act around my fellow hires? How are they going to act around employees? Are they going to treat people very simply the way that they want to be treated, right? In a way that reflects our values as a culture, our reputation as a brand. So I share this simply to sort of demonstrate the universality here. And, the buzz when it comes to why we are seeing such a rise in social media screening, there have been a lot of events in the mainstream. You can look at, simply the term, on Google Trends, social media fired, right? And see in the past 10 years or so, a litany of examples. It's now found its way into the common culture, into the discourse, people getting fired because of something they put on social media, people Googling someone before they hire them, looking them up on Facebook. Like Max said, I'm not here to smack anybody on the wrist or do anything, but we all do this, right? The more that this has become pervasive, that companies and organizations, agencies care about issues related to their brand, related to their reputation, and of course, the safety and security of their employees and the culture that they've built within those organizations, you're starting to see external risks appear on social media, find their way in the news, find their way into our culture. And that's really at a high level where you start to see a lot of the news and news media, et cetera. Probably one of the reasons we're having this conversation to begin with. But I want to point you to one stat. That's one of my big, takeaways for today. I always say, if there's one thing you remember, please remember this point. And I can say this because I'm a millennial. If you can't tell, I do have some gray hair up here, but I'm still in the millennial range, I believe. As of today, 50% of the workforce is Gen Z and millennial. By 2030, that number is going to be 75%. So we're starting to see millennials find their way into the sort of decision-making roles in organizations, them and Gen X, of course, as the boomer generation begins to retire. But as we are looking at the makeup of this workforce, these are all digital natives. I can speak from experience, right? We were the people that got a Facebook account in college, the very first group, if you remember. You had to have a .edu email address to get a Facebook account back when I did in 2004, excuse me. So, these are things that, like, from being a college kid to where we are now as professionals, we've developed, we've grown, we've learned, like me, we've gotten married, we've had families, we've become the professionals, the people that we are today. And guess what? Our online identities have expanded right alongside that. They've become diverse. We've lived so much of our lives, not just offline, but in the online world. And it's one of the reasons, and it's not just the external trends of seeing if you're like a Bravo TV fan, if you like, Real Housewives, you've seen the scandals, people getting fired because of social media. If you're a pro sports fan, going back to baseball, if you remember in 2018, there were pitchers that, were let go because of their racist tweets, right? And we see it time and time again, signals related in the media world, sports world, et cetera. But what's changing in the world of corporate HR, what's changing in the world of nonprofits is that, now we are beginning to tune our screening criteria, our approach, our best practice to the makeup and nature of that workforce. In other words, the toolkit that we have is, like many things, being tuned to the makeup of that workforce. And again, the simple question being, hey, how are we going to stand up an effective candidate screening process in a way that reflects the people we're actually hiring, who those people are, where they live their lives, et cetera. And it's not all as much as I would like it to be, puppy dogs and rainbows and cool cupcakes and is that a cake on social media? No, it turns out to be a picture of somebody. I've seen those memes. I've been there. It's not all that good stuff. A lot of times, unfortunately, we do see things like hate speech, fraud, threats. These are all real examples, that we found on behalf of our customers from a couple of years ago. People who say things like this online, that post it, that like it, et cetera, that, if this goes unchecked, right? Someone like this finds their way into your company. You can imagine the phone call that you get in HR at 2:30 in the morning when you weren't expecting it, right? Or that unpleasant email that lands in your inbox, then blows up your whole month, right? With some, harassment claim or something like that you have to deal with, disgruntled customers, disgruntled investors, disgruntled donors, whatever it might be, right? And so these are the things that unfortunately we do see from time to time. And it's one of the reasons that, 3 in 4 hiring managers are using social media to evaluate their candidates. When I started Fami, back in 2015, people would look at me and be like, you know what, Ben, my kids are on social media. I don't really get how that's relevant to hiring, right? This is pre-Me Too movement. This is pre-racial justice movement. This is pre-COVID, when social media usage dramatically expanded. Our online identities became richer and richer than ever before. This is before TikTok. This is before January 6th, where all this stuff got planned online and happened in real life. This is before all of that, right? And now, even then, I think the numbers were about 44% of companies as surveyed by Career Builder were using some form of social media stalking or Googling candidates, to learn a little bit more about a person. But now I think because of the fever pitch, which this sort of screening has reached in society as it relates to, ensuring that our brand lives up in the eyes of our customers or our constituents, ensuring that we have a culture and a safe workplace, that we're creating safe environments for all of our stakeholders. It's really tuned now, I think, to the makeup of that workforce. That is one of the driving factors we're seeing in the market now of adoption, is that companies are beginning to ask themselves, okay, well, if I'm thinking about my toolkit, and this is the sort of graphic I like to use for this portion of the conversation, you know, am I evolving? Am I still on the typewriter days, or am I ready for that MacBook? And that, why are we screening like it's 1999? We very intentionally here like to use this graphic to illustrate the scope of change that we are seeing. We have to, in the world of screening, I believe, not just do things the way that they were done before, not just to carry on in the way of our predecessor who, maybe was running the team prior to us, and our remit was to, reduce costs, reduce turnaround time, increase county coverage on CRIM, and oh yeah, maybe find a new drug test that can help us figure out how to get around, some of the challenges we see with the current program. But no, it's asking ourselves this question: what does the appropriate background screening package look like in 2024? Are we screening in ways that reflect the makeup of the people that we are hiring? Are we screening in ways that allow us to effectively evaluate risk in the manner at which it manifests itself for this population of potential workers, of people that we're hiring, even if we're talking about volunteers, right? I think this is compounded too, especially in the world of nonprofits, by how fast information spreads today, how quickly something can become controversial, whether it's in a school district at a very local level. Maybe someone misses something and, on a teacher when they're hiring them, and there's some article that comes out that didn't go check, that blows up for a whole school district. I've seen it before, right? You have, similar types of scenarios where external pressure on nonprofits, especially in, the world of nonprofits and children. We have seen everything from, of course, the Catholic Church to the Boy Scouts of America to a wide range of other organizations, some of which might be represented here. We had to look under the rug. We had to sweep out the dirt and take a look and fix some of the changes that we had and the people and what was happening with some of our constituents across the board, right? And so that pressure isn't going away. In other words, the parents, the donors, the various people who are involved in the success of our individual nonprofits and businesses, right, our volunteer organizations, our nonprofits more generally, they aren't going to take a more casual approach or flexible approach to when it comes to protecting their kids or making sure that that organization is operating the way that they expect it to. In other words, expectations are only increasing. So you have that externality layered on top of this changing workforce, right? And so that's where we recommend to really start not changing, but asking yourself the question: am I on typewriter or MacBook right now? Two options. They're polar, but how would I decide where our screening program is today? And often, again, we hear that it started online and ended in the workplace. I'm gonna come back to this on some legislation, changes right now that just happened this year. But now suddenly, this used to be a line. I think that companies could say, "Hey, it's online, does nothing to do with work. It's legal off-duty conduct." All that is out the door with the new ruling from the Ninth Circuit, which we'll come back to here in a second. But I think the one image in your mind I'd encourage you to conjure up here is that there is a increasingly blurring of the line between what's happening online and what's happening offline. So now let's get a little bit more tactical. So what I've tried to do here is sort of set the foundation. What is online screening? Why is it happening? What are the external forces that are coming from donors, stakeholders, parents of kids, the people who are parts of our programs, et cetera? What are the internal changes that are happening in the makeup and the nature of the workforce? Now you sort of see these dynamics changing where both society and market expectations are asking organizations different questions than they were before, holding them to different standards than they were before. But then you have that changing workforce. Okay, great. We were there. We built the foundation. Now let's get into, talking a little bit more about what does this actually look like in practice, and what are some of the compliance considerations we need to consider if we want to roll it out. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to throw in. I'm sure this is where a lot of those questions are going to come up when we get into tactics. But here's a bit on how online screening can help. So oftentimes people are like, "Oh, well, Ben, isn't this little big brother? Aren't you going to say, well, John's an 88, Jane is an 84. How are you going to score these people?" We're not scoring anybody. We don't do any thumbs up or a thumbs down. We don't tell you who's good or who's bad. This is not an opportunity to render judgment, but instead a way that you can fill in gaps in your own, just call it behavioral analysis of a candidate, right? Trying to understand this person's behavior, what they bring into the workplace, what they bring to customers, what they bring to their fellow employees. But instead of asking interview questions or calling people for references, you're using the online record to get at the same info. So in other words, you want to identify certain types of, misconduct. Conduct, again, being the definition of what's in your employee handbook. What's in your code of conduct? What is important to your organization? Many will say, hey, look, like we have people of all shapes, sizes, colors, dimensions, backgrounds, across the neurodiversity spectrum. We have so many different types of people here. We want to create a workplace that is welcoming to all those folks. They're not just people who work here, but people that we serve, right? And so, for example, a lot of folks will say, I want to know if someone's acting intolerant towards other people. I want to know if they're acting harassing towards other people. I want to know if they're normalizing illegal drug use because, hey, guess what? Like you're on 8 to 4 every day with kids. We're going to want to make sure that you're not on drugs, right? Or using drugs or trying to evade a drug test if you're running it, right? And so the first thing the companies do when they sign up with a company like ours, they define the sorts of things that they care about. Should a intolerant reference, whether it's in a TikTok video or a LinkedIn post or maybe even a Google result about a person, oh, click next way too fast. We are able to identify on your behalf the sorts of risk that matter to you as an organization. So the first thing you do, define the things that you care about. What are the things that, should they exist in a person's online identity, I would want to know about? Two, the piece of screening where misconduct happens. And again, a lot of text on the screen. You have all this, so I'm going to kind of gloss over some of the detail. But again, this is all available to you via PDF as a resource. You got to screen where this stuff is happening, right? In 2024, a lot of this is happening in video. So we typically recommend working with a partner that does have video coverage. For example, think TikTok, think Reels, Facebook, Instagram. I think I'm increasingly, as despite my appearance, becoming like the grandpa on Facebook, like using it to send pictures of my kids and see how my friends' kids are doing and all that. So I think we're kind of the last generation that's still on Facebook, but the bottom line is that you got to screen where misconduct happens, right? You have to also integrate it into your ATS or into your background screening portal. And that's where a lot of the magic happens, right? How do we screen where the risk is happening, but also present that risk in a dynamic way that allows us to stick within the bounds of our current workflow? And then three, only review checks that have misconduct on them. So in other words, like, just to give you a sense, we have processed this year, I think something like 470 million unique social media posts on behalf of our customers, and that's across all sources. About 469 million of those are automatically said, hey, there's no risk here, there's nothing here, we're clear, right? And so we're talking about a small number, but a small but impactful number of pieces of content that, should there be something in there that a customer wants to know about, we will flag it on your behalf. So in other words, as you'll see later, we'll show you the racist tweet. We'll organize it for you. We'll allow you then to bring that into your own decision-making process as if you had learned it through alternative means via interviewing somebody or perhaps conducting some type of reference. Now we'll get a little bit into some of the compliance side of things. So, historically, there was this big question of legal off-duty conduct, right? Of things that, and it still exists today. Don't get me wrong. Legal off-duty conduct is still a thing. But when it came to what happened online, there were a lot of questions around what's happening on personal social media sources, things that are public, right? But even if it's not happening in the workplace, can an employer be held liable because of that? In other words, if I go online and start, saying hateful things about one of my coworkers, the company can actually get a harassment claim because of that in the same way as if that happened in person, right? And so this had been proven out in smaller cases throughout the country over the past 5 years or so. As kind of a compliance nerd on this stuff, I would say like maybe 5 to 6, maybe upwards of 10 cases per year, but they were in lower courts. They typically stayed at the county or at the city level, were settled there, sometimes escalated to, various state Supreme Courts. But here we had a ruling in the influential Ninth Circuit that essentially found employers liable for this sort of stuff. So now, and this is only as of July of 2024. So we're talking about, in the world of litigation, very fresh, probably still steaming out of the oven type litigation that we're talking about here, which is essentially now confirming that employers are liable for what happens online as it relates to their employees and harassment in the workplace. But for a long time, this has been regulated by the FTC. So there was a company called Social Intelligence who we were lucky enough to acquire last year that was the first company to get into online and social media screening. They actually kind of wrote the book on it. They wrote a literal letter to the FTC explaining and working with their attorneys, spending all kinds of money on how to make this legal. So the FTC essentially has labeled under the FCRA, so just like any other consumer reporting agency, making that, this is a product line that has to be FCRA compliant, maximum possible accuracy, job relevant information, all of the candidate rights associated, right? The pre-adverse adverse action process, everything that applies to a criminal background check today of your requirements under the FCRA as an employer, all of those apply here. And, we are a CRA. So we hold ourselves to the same sorts of standards that a background screening firm does. So in other words, not just what you see here, screening for a permissible purpose, the disclosure and authorization process, consumer disputes, policies and procedures concerning accuracy, but we try to lead the charge on that stuff. We will only match on 3 identifiers, for example, and not 2, because this is still, I think, increasingly less so, but early adopters from a compliance standpoint were the first ones to start doing this. So we wanted to make sure as a company, we were doing it right. And so just know that the same rules that apply to a background check today apply to a social media check if you're paying a third party to do it. So exact same thing applies. Anytime a third party is compiling publicly available information about a person that can be used in the hiring process, the FCRA does apply here. So we'll come back to that in a minute when we get into some reports, but it's not just FCRA. One of the reasons, and I think, Mac, the reason you kind of framed it like this, we hear it often, is that HR, wants to do these checks. All the things I've said are like, yeah, of course we want to know about someone's behavior. Of course we want to know if they've acted hateful or violent towards somebody. But hey, legal, they're telling me we can't do this stuff, right? They're telling me we can't look at a person's online presence as part of the hiring process. And doing it yourself, that's true. If you do these sorts of checks on your own, you end up seeing things that you shouldn't see. And I'll give you an example. So imagine that I'm a hiring manager and I suddenly just decide I want to look up, Jane Smith because Jane is applying at a job and I like her. I think she's a good fit, but I want to do one last Google myself and make sure. Let's say I happen to see in Jane's Facebook profile a picture of her in a wheelchair, winning a wheelchair race, playing a wheelchair basketball game, for example. I probably didn't know that through the interview process because it was all on Zoom right now, like right now, sitting down, right? I might not have learned that. I might also see that Jane is pregnant in a photo. Again, it was a Zoom interview. It was below the waist. I didn't see it, right? How would I have known? Now, according to the EEO, I've seen protected class information about this person that I can't unsee. Or for this slide and the, very simple 5 words, you can't unring the bell. You can't unsee information according to the EEO if you saw it. In other words, like if I saw that information, I couldn't just say, oh yeah, I saw it, but I ignored it. No, the EEO says, hey, if you saw it, there is a reasonable bias that you can't even control, human, that means that you're using this information even unconsciously as part of a hiring decision. So one of the reasons that companies are often discouraged from doing this is because you really can't see things on your own. Now, if you decide and said, hey, we're not ready quite yet when we want to run a check. We don't want to go to the third party yet. We want to do it internally. There are ways you can do this internally on your own, but it would require a sort of delineation and a separation between the person who's making the hiring decision and who's reviewing these hits. Creates essentially unnecessary bureaucracy, and makes one person the social media screening person internally, which if you're hiring at scale is probably not a job you want to pay for and something you can outsource a little bit easier. And just to show like the complexity of the problem that I'm talking about here, just to show you, one example, I'm now seeing, on someone's Facebook account, what to expect when you're expecting baby names. They were in the military. Oh, I see that they went to a Catholic school. Oh, I see now that their ethnicity, that, they're married, whatever it might be, right? So you can get very, very close in terms of seeing protected classes that you don't want to see when you're screening. So this is typically I recommend not to do it. So again, if you're gonna do this internally, make sure that the person who's doing it has no data relationship, isn't sending anything, isn't providing context or weighing in whatsoever in the final hiring decision. That person's role then kind of becomes like a binary, like pass fail, which again becomes kind of a challenge. We do recommend going to a third party, but if you're a small team, hey, it doesn't make sense for us to work with a third party. Typically recommend separating, those two pieces out. Now, when it comes for things that we flag for, what we screen, there are certain things that we do and don't flag for. I won't go through all of these individually, but think of these as kind of like the bright line violations customers care about, whether it's criminal behavior, online trolling, online harassment, for example, of ostracizing, name calling, bullying, or insulting other people, cannabis, other drugs. Interestingly, most people would kind of look at this trolling flag and say, okay, well, you know, trolling, that kind of just seems like something that happens outside of the workplace. But this bullying piece right now, in particular, specifically in the UK, has actually fallen under what they call non-financial misconduct that employers are also liable for. So I know it's crazy. I know it hasn't happened in the United States yet, but in the UK right now, if you bully somebody online, not only can you be fired for it, but your company can be responsible for it. In the realm of FCA, which is like, their financial sort of conduct authority is what they call it over there, similar to many of the three-letter organizations we have here in the United States. You can get a serious penalty and violation on just online bullying alone. So again, companies are starting to care about all these types of risk. We split out cannabis and other drugs. A lot of states, for example, where you can't use cannabis as part of a hiring decision, right? And so if it's legal, if it's commercial, whatever it might be, so you can split those things out. But imagine being able to turn these flags on or off. I want to know, I don't care about references to cannabis. Maybe I don't care about trolling, right? That's not what I'm really interested in for risk as I see it for my organization. But yeah, I want to know about references to drugs, crime, tolerance, harassment, et cetera. So, I'll just show you here as we kind of screen. But with covering sources too. So a lot of people, they think, oh, social media screening, like what does that mean in context? It's not just what happens on social media, but what happens across the publicly available web too. So oftentimes like Google results, things that appear on message boards, Reddit, et cetera, sources that people want to pick up. But of course, all the good stuff, we typically do recommend working with a firm or with a partner that will allow you to get video coverage, just because, today so much of what happens online is video centric. So ensuring that you have a partner that allows you to kind of, get that video in there. This is like a slide from one of our sales decks. So your salesperson, that doesn't mean anything to you guys, but these are the sources that we cover. And now let me walk you through a quick sample report so we can get to some of these questions. So we show you right up top, the person's information. There's a sort of compliance overview here, that you can take a look at. We link you to all the social media profiles we find, and then we'll just show you, are there reports that have flags within them, right? Whether it's across social media or across news and web. We allow you to do custom keywords, flags as well. So again, this is designed to be very similar to a background screening report. If you saw zeros across the board here, that report, just like any other thing in background checks, would be clear. If you see 10 flags, 1 flag, whatever it might be, that might meet your internal threshold for decisional. But having a policy that essentially allows you to adjudicate these reports and say, yeah, any flag we want to take a look at, or it has to be 5 flags at the intolerance level, that's what meets the threshold for us. That's what we care about. Oftentimes companies, because even one post or video, even if it's just one thing, if it's really salacious and really bad, matters and is different. So most companies will say, hey, look, if there's any flags or any hits, I want to know about them. And that number, can be anywhere between, 5 and 10% of all people that you're screening, depending upon how wide of a lens you take. But again, just remember, like 469 of 471 million posts were automatically disqualifying. So think of this as like high impact, low probability type screening. And the sample reports, again, we show you, and apologize for some of this this language here, but she's talking here on different types of flags and things like that. So we screen, we'll just go. I don't want to keep this too much on screen, but we show you the flags. We show you what we flagged for, and I don't want to spend too much time putting a bunch of profanity up on a very professional webinar, but yeah, that really should get us to a point of why is this happening? Changing nature of the workforce, right? If we go back to the presentation, here's how you run it. Liability is shifting. It's all FCRA compliant. Make sure you see things or you don't see things that you shouldn't see. You can't unring the bell. Just remember that piece. And finally, being to see what reports look like, what sources are covered, et cetera, throughout the process. So I will pause there and answer a couple of questions. So if you haven't found the QA tab, feel free to go look on the Zoom and you'll be able to see that QA tab. You punch in some questions there and I'll answer the first question, which thanks for the presentation. Thank you. Is this legal? Can I actually use it in a hiring decision? So yes, the answer is yes. You can use social media data in a hiring decision. Now, the big piece, you have to, of course, follow many of the pieces that we just talked about related to FCRA compliance, for example, EEO compliance. But the big question that we often get from employers is like, okay, I know if it is legal, how do I make it legal for my organization? It goes back to that question in the United States, at least, of permissible purpose, having a business purpose to view that information. Why are you viewing this information in the first place, right? What is it that if I drew a straight line between that behavior and impacted my job in my workplace, it would be crystal clear to all parties involved. In other words, using that example I shared, hey, we got a multi-ethnic, multicultural, neurodiverse workforce. You got somebody who's coming in who's talking trash about people who are neurodiverse. They're saying racist things on social media, right? Like that is going to be a direct conflict, both in creating friction and destroying the harmony I have inside of my company. But gosh, if this gets out and I'm in the world of nonprofits and one of my key donors sees this, or there's a news article about it in a local gazette or a local journal, maybe a college newspaper, high school newspaper even, and that gets out, that's a problem for me. That means I might not be able to raise money. So it's that direct line where you have to ask yourself that question of what risk matters. And I'll just go back a couple of slides here just to show you, looking at, these flags here. What among these flags would be relevant, right, to you? And that's a quick question for you to ask right now. What of these flags would be relevant to me if I was in a position of hiring somebody and let's say even happened offline, somebody threatened someone, if someone acted intolerant? You kind of know most of this. I would say, again, cannabis, sometimes sexual, references, misconduct, all that doesn't, necessarily meet the threshold depending upon the company or the organization. But again, that's the question you have to ask is, if I'm going to use something in a hiring decision, I have to make sure it maps to, the things that I care about and that matter to me at this company. Cool. So with that, here, I'll just go back to our questions section here.
Hey, Ben, I had a quick question.
Sure.
Yeah, this is Evan over 501c. Hi, everybody. I am Gen Z, and I've had my own profiles broken into, taken over. Old email addresses have been used to create fake profiles, and interesting things have been posted under my name without me actually doing it. How can managers through you guys at FAMA or just in general handle fake profiles and ensuring that it's actually the person posting that content, whether good or bad?
Yeah, there are a wide range of great question, by the way. Thanks for that. There are a wide range of different technical answers to your question, where actually on every sample report, we do even include a quick slide. I'll just show you here since you ask. I guess it doesn't make it cut off here in this image, but right here where it says accuracy, there's sort of an accuracy subheader where we do attempt to determine if a person was a victim of computer hacking. We've also seen people who might have like left their social media logged in at an Apple store or a library or something like that, right? And, people post on their behalf. So one, there are technical measures we put in place to determine that sort of thing. But two, it's one of the reasons that when, as an employer, you take action on this part of the FCRA, that again, that pre-adverse action, you're sending a copy of the report to the candidate. You're explaining to them, right? And the candidate, depending upon the jurisdiction, the states has 5 to 7 business days, depending upon their location, to challenge a result or explain why something was, out there, right? And typically that's when a candidate would explain oh yeah, I was hacked, right? And then it's up to the discretion of the employer. And of course, they can confer with us and ask us from a technical standpoint what we see. But that's typically how it happens today, is that a candidate and the company, or the organization in this case, have to have a discussion about the findings if a candidate would like to, as part of being FICRA compliant.
Cool, thanks.
No worries. Another question here: can you use information found through public records from municipalities if you can draw the line? Great question, Pam. Yes, you can. So you can use information from public records from municipalities. Now, there is a sort of answer to your question, Pam, here, so I'm not trying to be obtuse or deflect or anything, but certain jurisdictions have certain types of look-back period requirements, or arrest records, for example, that if it didn't result in a conviction, you can't use it in a hiring decision. So public records in this case is kind of a very general term, where we typically do recommend that you run a traditional background check for traditional public record analysis of like a NAT crim check or a county local crim check, that sort of thing. But you can, with the right reporting restrictions in place, which we apply at FAMA, ensure that you're only reporting on stuff that is actionable. So sort of yes is to answer your question, but sometimes no, which is always a fun lawyer response. So hopefully that answers your question. Anything else? We didn't have too many questions today. No worries, Pam, I got you. Any other questions before I hand it back over to Mac? All right. Well, we appreciate it. Thank you so much for having us here. I'll see if I have one more. There you go. Here's a little chat with us, little line here for you guys, and cool image of our closer image there. So there we go. That's it. That's all I got for you. Thank you so much for taking the time, and appreciate it, Mac, for having us involved here. So thanks a lot for letting us join.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for joining us. And like we said earlier, everybody, we will follow up with copies of everything, credits for everything. And if you have any questions, you've gotten emails from us. Ben's group will also be emailing you their information, so that if you have questions specifically for them about any of this, you can contact them directly. And you can also reach them through me. So have a great day, everybody. Ben, thanks for your time.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.